Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and get the House Retirement Committee underway. Appreciate everyone being here this Tuesday afternoon. I'm going to ask Representative, or should I say, Floor Leader Larikia to open us up with a word of prayer. Dominic?
Let's pray. Heavenly Father God, we love you. We thank you for living in the greatest state, in the greatest nation on the planet Earth, Lord. We just thank you for those brave men and women that protect and guard the freedom and liberty that we have. Just be with us now as we make decisions to lead this state and to serve the people. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, Dominic. So I wanted to open up by saying welcome. First of all, we were going to have a joint meeting with the Senate Retirement Committee and make it efficient as possible for our friends with ERS and TRS and so forth. But we received word from the Senate that out of their 8 committee members, 5 were either had COVID or were in quarantine. So I don't want to frighten you from going to their committee meeting tomorrow. But anyways, I wanted to make it as efficient as possible because we're going to have an overview, as I understand it, from ERS and TRS today. But we tried to do it all at once and apologize that we weren't able to make that happen. First up, I wanted us to, as a committee, adopt a retirement committee rules. They're in your pack right here. Everybody should have a copy of these one-page rules. These have not changed at all from the 2019-2020 version, except some of you may know, and I appreciate, first of all, I want to introduce Sarah Arroyo. Sarah is from House Budget Research Office, dedicated to the Retirement Committee and does an excellent job. Work with her on appropriations, so she is a valuable asset for our committee. One thing that I noted from Sarah noted from the committee rules for 2019 and 2020 is that a quorum was only 4 members, and that had been actually reduced from 6 members back, I think, 2 terms ago. And from the 2019-20 session, we had 17 members with a quorum of 4. And that was down from 6 from a couple terms earlier. Our committee, House Retirement Committee, is now up to 22 members. So I wanted to increase the quorum to 8. I know that's not half, but I believe that's a little bit more representative than just having 4 members as a quorum. Happy to have a discussion about that. Most of you know how bills work in Retirement Committee. We have fiscal bills and we have non-fiscal bills. Is Greg Griffin here? There he is. Greg Griffin, raise your hand. He's the state auditor. He determines by law which bills are fiscal and non-fiscal, and which ones we can pass in a single session versus which ones are going to take 2 years. Moving down to number 7, we do not have, the chair may appoint officers. The chair may appoint officers of subcommittees. We typically do not have subcommittees. If we have a need and there's a legislative need, I'm happy to create one. But it's my understanding Retirement Committee doesn't typically have subcommittees. I'll give you a minute to read over the rules. Does anybody have any questions from the members or on Zoom? Any questions? Okay. Any question from any of the members? I just thought we don't want to run a 22-member committee with a quorum of 4. I thought it'd be a little bit fair to have a little bit larger than that. That's a proper time. Thank you. All right. Got a motion, got a second. Any further discussion? Anybody online? All in favor, say aye. All opposed?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Sound like an aye. Okay. I'm going to go with the rules approved. Thank you very much for that and allowing my indulgence there. Okay. If I can, I'd like to introduce a couple of, I don't know if they're new members to the committee, but I know we have a couple of members that are new to the Georgia House. Representative Lim, what's your number? If you don't mind introducing yourself and a little bit about your background and where you're from. Try that.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Representative Marvin Lim. I represent House District 99. It's in Gwinnett County, unincorporated Norcross, Tucker, Lilburn. I am just another attorney. I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Lim. And Derek Mallow, is Derek in the room or might be online? No, I'm going to keep going then. All right. So with that, I believe we have Vice Chair Kirby online, Secretary Sam Watson, appreciate you being here as well. And I know the former Retirement Committee Chair, Chairman Bitton, I believe he's going to be joining us in about 15, 20 minutes or so. With that, I like to run efficient meetings. Do we have the folks from TRS here? Are we ready? All right, if we can go ahead. I wanted us to come on up, sir. I was hoping we could have an overview, particularly as we start a new term, but also since we have a number of members, not just new to the legislature, but also new to the retirement committee. I thought it would be a good practice to go ahead and have an overview of the TRS and ERS for everyone's edification. So thank you for being here, and podium mic. See if that microphone's working.
Testing.
All right.
Mr.
Go
Chair-
ahead, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, it'd be okay to remove the mask while I speak?
Absolutely.
All right, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Buster Evans, Executive Director of the Teachers Retirement System of Georgia. I want to welcome the new committee members, and glad that you're on the Retirement Committee, but also want to welcome back the committee members that we've had an opportunity to work with over the last several years.
Buster, if I may, real quick, we had lunch last week and you had hair that was about 10 inches longer last week. What happened?
My wife had been out of town and she came back home and found that I did not look presentable to present toward a House Retirement Committee. So we cut the hair last night.
That is a very good answer. Please continue.
And complete transparency, my head's about to freeze to death today. Well, thank you for the opportunity to share with you a little bit about Teachers Retirement System. Chances are you've probably talked to someone along the way about Teachers Retirement System. If you haven't, you probably will when you go back home to church or someplace like that or in the community, because it happens to be a topic of conversation sometimes. We do serve the pre-K through 12 public education arena, colleges and universities of the University System of Georgia, technical colleges, county extension, libraries, and RESAs. Those are our primary employers that we serve. We have approximately 424 unique employers with all of our school systems, our colleges and technical colleges, and so forth. Now, a lot of people wonder, why do we have a Teachers Retirement System defined benefit retirement plan in Georgia? And primarily two reasons that you will hear. And if you listen to Governor Kemp's press conference a while ago, the retirement happened to play a little bit of part of that package that comes forth. But the two primary reasons are recruitment of educators into the profession, whether they're K-12 or whether they're higher education, but not only recruitment, retention of outstanding people who join the profession to keep them in, especially during some of their most productive years into the profession. Let me share with you a little bit of our membership data. As of January the 1st, we have over 400,000 active, retired, and inactive members of Teachers Retirement System. That breaks down to be something like this. We have about 237,000 active contributing members. Those are people who are employed. They get a check every month, and as a part of being employed by an employer, they're making an employee contribution, and their employer is making an employer contribution as well. Each month, we send a benefit payment to approximately 137,000 retirees or beneficiaries. That average benefit now is at approximately $3,300 a month to all of those beneficiaries all across Georgia and beyond. Now, this is a piece of data that I love to share, but we have over the age of 85, we have 8,590 retirees. 81 of those are above the age of 100. Now, would you like to guess how many of those 81 over 100 are men? One, and that is my and Representative Irwin's new goal in life, is to one day be that guy. But that's the way that breaks down. Tell you a little bit about a fiscal year 2020 data. We ended the year, it was actually, as many systems had, we had somewhat of a challenging year last year. When we were meeting with you guys during the spring of last year and went home somewhere around March the 23rd, we saw our asset base go from about 85 billion down to $62 billion. It was a pretty big drop. Fortunately, we wound up the year in positive territory, actually earning 5.42% by the end of the fiscal year. When you look at other retirement systems across the country, and I'm sure that my colleague, Mr. Popman, will share as well, we actually wound up quite good compared to the average pension system across the country, whose average returns were only about 3.1% for the year. We pay out each year $5.2 billion in benefits, averaging about $425 million going out each per month. People are oftentimes interested in the status.
Yes.
For the folks on Zoom, if you could, Buster is presenting. If you could put your mics on mute. Thank you very much.
Our funding ratio at present is 76.7%, and we currently have a $23.7 billion unfunded accrued actuarial liability. In 2012, our Board of Trustees adopted a closed amortization scale to pay off that unfunded accrued liability, which actually was part of the reason why our employer contributions we saw them increase over time. That is a significant unfunded accrued liability, but our amortization scale has that liability to be completely paid off by the year 2042. This funding ratio of approximately 77% places us among the top third of pension systems in the nation, but certainly we would love to see our funding ratio move higher, and we look forward to that moving that direction in the next few years. During the 10-year period ending June 30th, 2019, let me share with you a little bit about where our funding came from. Our employer contributions were approximately 21.4%. Our member contributions were a total of 8.9%, but our investment income, which pays the majority of our benefits, was 69.7% of all of our income. As of 2022, our employee contribution rate, which is set forth in Georgia law to be between 5 and 6%. The employee contribution rate is at 6%, and the employer contribution rate will be 19.81%, which is a little bit higher than last year, but certainly less than it was year before last when we were up at over 21.14%. Now, there have been 4 noticeable trends that we have seen during the COVID pandemic that I'd like to share with you. First of all, despite that horrific dip in assets back in March that I told you about, we finished the calendar year with a 15% return on investments. Again, that's calendar year and not the fiscal year. That's good news. The second trend that we've noticed has been—
Buster, if I can interrupt you real quick, what he's referencing is this is a page in your pack. I'm sorry, Buster. It says net position rolling 12 months. Net position rolling 12 months. And when he's referring to a 5.42% return, that is through June 30th. When he's referring to is it 15% return? That's through December 30th. So what he's showing on this net return on this chart, this is for a 12-month period, is recovery of the asset values in the pension, particularly from the what would you say, trough in mid-March. Is that correct, sir?
Absolutely, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and they like to refer to that as a V-shaped recovery. We are certainly glad that it had a V-shaped recovery, and so glad that we were able to end the calendar year. As of today, we're at approximately 18% return. So even as we go into calendar year 2021, we're still doing quite well. The second noticeable trend that I wanted to share with you was our retirement rate. Initially, there was speculation that we would see significant increases in the retirement rate. Actually, as of June the 30th, our retirement rates had dropped by about 10%. But just hold on to that for a second, because when August has come back around, every month since August, we have seen an increase in retirement rates. So just think about the fact we ended the year with a reduction in our retirement rate. And here we are some 7 months into our fiscal year. And every month since we've begun that, we've seen an increase in those retirements. We realistically think it's probably going to be a wash by the time it's all over with between the 2 years. And if you're interested in more speculation about that, I'll certainly be glad to answer questions. But what we've not seen is an overwhelmingly high number of retirements. If you look across the country, you will see some states are reporting really, really high retirement rates. That's not our experience yet. Most of our educators have certainly held strong. They've continued to work, and they've continued to serve our children in Georgia's classrooms all across the state. The third noticeable trend that I wanted to share with you today is that we have fewer account refunds. Now, what does that mean? That means people are not quitting their jobs, and they're not pulling their money out of the retirement system. Most people, as you well know, coming from communities all across the state of Georgia, a lot of times our educators in places like Douglas and Cordell and places like that in Moultrie, Georgia, they're the primary breadwinners. They've got secure jobs. And during these challenging times, they're not leaving the profession, which is actually a good thing. So we like to see the fact that we're not losing educators in the profession. And hopefully that means that we will see larger numbers of our educators actually getting to that vesting period and hopefully being able to be retained. But we certainly think part of that is because the stability that they find in their employment with our educator employers. The fourth, and this is probably the most discouraging trend that we've seen an increased death rate among our retirees. We month over month, ever since we started tracking this in April. And the reason why we began tracking this is we would hear stories of people that we knew from all across the state their deaths were being reported to us, or we were reading it into the news. And so I had our people begin to track our death rates. So every month since the month of April, we've seen increased year over year deaths among our membership. To be interesting to see how that bears out over time, and whether or not somewhere down the road that has a tendency to influence mortality tables. I'm not an actuary, so I won't go too far down that road, but you got to think that if that trend continued for a very long period of time, that means unfortunately we will not be paying benefits to a lot of people that we would otherwise have been paying retirement benefits to. The last thing, and in conclusion, that I would like to share with you is a little bit about our economic impact across Georgia. We've done this for 3 years in a row now. I've noticed several of you have seen your economic impact brochure. As I shared with you, roughly $425 million is paid each month to our beneficiaries. You can look in each county across Georgia and you can see how much money winds up back in your own communities. You can see how many retirees there. You can actually see how many active members that you have. And we like to say that teachers' retirement system benefit that goes back to counties all across Georgia winds up to pay taxes, to buy groceries, to wind up in the church offering plates, and to support the local businesses throughout Georgia. We do not exist as an economic impact organization. We exist as a part of educational policy. but we do like to point out the fact that that economic impact is felt all across Georgia. We thank you for the opportunity to present to you this afternoon. Mr. Chairman, if you or any of your members have any questions or would like any clarification, we'll do our best to answer them. If we can't, we'll get back with you with that information.
Thank you, Buster. I appreciate that. Would you mind if I can ask on behalf of the committee, can we can share these numbers with our counties, our chambers of commerce and so forth, things like that, correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. We've also sent each of you a PDF link if you would like to email that to any of you. And I know oftentimes you'll be asked to speak to your retiree groups or your educator groups in your community. And this is information that I think that they would find to be very interesting as well.
Okay. Any questions for Buster? Floor Leader LaRicchia, I forgot your number, 13, lucky 13?
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned that there were not as many teachers kind of leaving and cashing out and taking that, I guess, some of that money with them. And I have had several teachers over the last 2 years mention to me that they were more excited because of that historic pay increase that the governor had given them, and teachers that were looking at retirement, but said, now I got to stay 2 more years, or, something like that. So I have to imagine that the governor, in taking that step, has a lot to do with that number you just shared with retention. Whether it's a teacher that's been in there 3 years and the confidence that it gives him or her that they're going to see those pay increases, or the ones that were about to turn in their notice to retire and said, well, got to stick around 2 more years and that. Would you comment on that?
Absolutely, Representative LaRicchia. No doubt that the teacher pay raise has kept educators into the profession for a longer period of time. The reason for that is their final retirement benefit is based on their highest 24 months of salary. And so essentially, if they'll work an additional 2 or 3 years, that will actually increase their retirement benefit. But they do have to work, generally speaking, about 3 years to maximize the highest level. And I would tell you that is exactly one of the several reasons why we think that teachers, why our retirement numbers were actually lower. And again, from our standpoint, we like to see lower retirement numbers in a case like that, because if the local employer is paying them, we're not having to. And that gives us an additional opportunity to potentially catch up a little bit. So very, very good observation. Thank you.
Okay, Buster, we got another question. Number 10, is that Chairman Watson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Buster, thank you for your presentation. I'm a fairly young man and I don't know a lot about all this, but I was just curious about the employer contribution rate. I just noticed that since 2015, it's continued to go up and was as high as 21% in 2020, and then it estimated to drop back down. Is that based on growth, or is that a silly question, or just curious?
No, it's a very observant question. One of the challenges that we face is our employer contribution rate is what we call the actuarially determined employer contribution rate. Every year, our actuary determines, based on how well we're doing and what our future payout of benefits it looks like, what that employer contribution rate has to be. Obviously, when that number goes up, that means the state has to put more money in the budget to cover it. It also means that the local employer has to put more money in the budget to cover it. We were really thrilled last year when that number went down from 21.14 to 19.06, and it made it a lot easier to talk with y'all last year. Now that it's going back up a little bit this year, it certainly makes a little bit more of a challenge, because there's a roughly $66 million in the state budget increase this year to cover that. The good news is that we feel that this employer contribution rate is pretty stable, but it is dependent on a couple of important things. One, do we meet our assumed rate of return of 7.2%? Number one. And two, it also depends on the commitment that our state has always had to pay that employer contribution rate. And that is one of the reasons when you hear about retirement systems across the country that, and I won't call names, but there occasionally you'll hear of a system that's not doing well. Oftentimes it is because the state did not make that employer contribution rate. So we're keenly aware of that. But I'll also say that we've not done a lot of things in Georgia to bring down pressure off of that employer contribution rate. But it is something that we're very, very aware of. We know how it impacts our employers. And I will be the first one to tell you, I hope that that number continues to stay where it is at, if not go down, based on the fact that our returns on investment beat our assumed rate of return. And if we could do that over a period of time and have those good returns, it would give you guys some relief as you prepare our budget every year. And I hope I answered your question.
You did. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Watson. We have another question, number 6. Where is that? Right there. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Bitten. I don't. Is that number 6? Try that.
That's it. Thank you, Buster. Thank you again for your presentation. Wanted to know if the trustees are looking at implementing any different policies to help with the unfunded liability.
Thank you, Mr. Representative. Our Board of Trustees over the period of time has done a number of things that basically a whole list of things that have made reduced our liability. Certainly, I think there are things that by statute have to be done within legislation. There are some things that our Board of Trustees can look at. We have looked at most recently one of the some of the easier things to maybe look at, and that's interest on member accounts. I think you and I have had that conversation. Is one such things that we've looked at. As you're also well aware, a couple of years ago, Senate Appropriations Committee called for a special investigation or performance audit where several other things were looked at. And certainly with the support of the legislature and the administration, our trustees would feel comfortable in having whatever conversations that we could, which would lead toward greater sustainability and cost.
Follow-up question, if I could, Mr. Chairman. You said you've looked at things. Have you changed any policy?
We have in years past. We've not changed anything within the last couple of years.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions in the room? We do have one question on Zoom.
Good afternoon. I am Representative Sharon Henderson. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. My question, when retired teachers reach retirement and they have accumulated vacation time, does that vacation time count towards retirement?
Vacation time is not considered counting toward retirement. What does count for teachers would be forfeited and unused sick leave. If there is vacation time, depending on the employer, they may be paid for that vacation time, but that vacation time would not count toward that retirement. So to answer your question, not vacation time, only forfeited and unused sick leave, as long as they have at least 60 days of sick leave that can go toward that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Henderson. I forgot to introduce Sharon Henderson, also new state rep and new to the committee. So thank you for that. We have another question already on Zoom from Representative my area in Marietta, Mary Frances Williams. Mary, are you on?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's Mary Frances, but thank you very much. So that's okay. I have a question about, I'm new to the committee, death benefits, I guess. You mentioned that you've had a higher number than, you've had a fairly high number of folks who've died. And if people die before they start retirement, or I guess after they've started, but especially before they've even started, is there a death benefit for their people who are inheriting people who are inheriting from them?
Thank you, Representative, for that question. Very clearly, it's a sensitive question as we are losing members. If someone passes away prior to retirement, their beneficiaries who are listed as beneficiaries would be able to assume the benefit that would have been paid to that person under a survivorship benefit. So in other words, it will be a little bit less. Now, if a person passes away after retirement, and the general rule of thumb is if they've been, it may depend on what option they chose at retirement. If they chose a survivorship benefit, that their benefit may carry forward to whoever their retirement was. If they chose our most commonly selected plan, which is our maximum plan, or Plan A, which pays a full 2% for every year of service, that they would not continue to receive a benefit, but if there's money still left in their account, they would receive the balance of their account. Generally speaking, that balance is diminished within about a 2-year period of time, or 24 months. So it is possible for someone to, let's say, have retired 2 years ago and then passed away 3 years ago. If they selected the maximum plan, there would not be anything left to their beneficiaries, unless they had selected that a plan that allowed for survivorship.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Frances. Do we have I've got a button blinking on my screen, but I don't know who's asking the question. Do we have another question? Okay, it was from number 6, but okay. Marvin, what's your number? Okay. Push your button. There you go. Representative Lim.
I just have, I think, as a basic question, you mentioned some of the statutory maximums and minimums for employee contributions, et cetera. I was just curious, what explains that there's variation in this particular chart, that the employee contribution is 10%? Is that a different statistic with that?
Okay, those are the employee contributions that go in toward making the investment income. Now, while the employee contribution, that's a percentage of the total. So in other words, that 6% is the amount that employee pays out of their payment. But when you aggregate it all over time to pay for all of the investment income, 10%. That could also be made up of forfeited contributions. An example of that might be, let's say that you have someone who works for 5 years and they've made contributions into the system. They actually get out 100% of what they put in, but they're not able to withdraw what the employer paid in on their behalf.
Yes, you good? You have a follow-up? All right. Any other questions from the committee? Buster, I want to thank you for being here. I also want to, let's continue the conversation. I think Representative Benton had some very good questions in regard to what else can we do in regard to closing the gap, what you and I talked about last week, closing the gap on the 78% funding. I think, we all talk about how in Georgia we have a 26, 27, $28 billion budget. You just need to look at, and me, I'm going to look at financial statements, but just as of December 31st, 2020, we're looking at 91 billion of assets, and the market's up quite a bit today, isn't it? So this is very interesting to me, and I think it's important for the committee, just in my humble opinion. I know we have Greg Griffin here, the state auditor. I think it's important that we look at a trending, that we look at a long-term trending. So not what is the number going to be at June 30th or March 31st, but what's the number going to be in 5 years, 10 years, and so forth, to make sure these people are paid the benefits that they are expected and have earned. So So Buster, I definitely want to continue the conversation, whatever we can do in regard to closing the funding gap. I believe there's various pieces to that. Well, there's many pieces to this, but in regard to the funding, the funded ratio, which is right at 78%. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct.
So there's employee contributions, there's employer contributions, there's investment return, and taking away from the funding is obviously claims being paid. So it's, there's a lot of intricate details in each of those, but that's overall the gist of it. Is that not correct?
I think, Mr. Chairman, you have it. A lot of moving parts and each one is dependent upon the other.
Right. And then obviously you have planned expenses for the administration and so forth. Can you, just one question, can you talk about the vesting schedule? So if I'm a 24 years old and I am hired at a UGA to be a kindergarten teacher in Bibb County and I'm making X thousand per year, am I automatically in the TRS, or do I need to elect to be in the TRS? And then at what point do I completely vest in the employer contributions in my role?
In that scenario with a pre-K through 12 employer, you are automatically enrolled in Teachers Retirement System. You do not have a choice. Now, if you're with some of our other employers, you may have a choice. For example, our University System of Georgia has an optional retirement plan. So when you go to work there, you choose whether or not you want to be an ORP or in TRS. If you go to work at a technical college, you may have an option to go into either ERS or TRS. But as far as a regular public school, you would be automatically enrolled and you would be vested after 10 years of service, whether or not that's all 10 years in a row or whether you've had a break in service, as long as you did not withdraw your funds, as long as you had 10 years of creditable service, you would be vested.
And is that a cliff vesting? I reached 10 years and I'm in, or is it 1 year and I'm vested 10%, 2 years I'm vested 20%, or is it a cliff vesting, all or nothing?
It's all or nothing. Absolutely. Okay. Yes.
Got it. Okay. Any other questions for Buster? Yes, sir. Leader Luricchio.
The governor's looking at, I'm sorry, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The governor's looking at now, hopefully being able to encourage some of these retirees to come back and work within these systems. And I think Gwinnett County shared with us that if they had to contribute the employer and employee share into TRS, that they would pay in an additional $4 million a year with the retirees they had. I think this was Chairman Benton, I know you were in that meeting when they were talking to us, but wouldn't that make a difference on the long-term or the overall impact of TRS if these systems that hire these teachers back in, and I think they can even bring them back in at 100%, but the employer does have to pay the employer and employees portion of TRS, wouldn't that have a positive impact on TRS moving forward?
We believe that would have somewhat of a positive impact on TRS because those members would not be accruing any additional service, first of all. Secondly, right now, a retiree can go to work and work for an employer for 49% or less, and no employer or employee contribution is paid into it. Now, they may or may not be, as a 49% employee, actually taking a position that is a TRS earned or QBE earned position. So in other words, an employer could be earning that. And then if I'm hiring a number of 49% people, I may not be paying it. But to answer your question, we do not believe it would have any actuarial impact on the system. We do believe that we would be getting revenues that we would otherwise not be getting. But from an educational policy perspective, it is a tool that our local employers could be able to use in the event that they need to bring a retiree back to work, particularly in a critical needs area, as many areas of our state do have.
If I could just follow up on that, what would you say, from your standpoint, you're not in the school systems, I understand, but as far as critical need, would that be chemistry teachers, physics teachers? What specifically would you be?
My experience of an educator and continue to keep up with the profession, it would be math, science, special education, foreign language, perhaps some other areas that are geographically different in some areas. There's some, I'll use an example. You may be in Clay County, Georgia, and you need an elementary teacher. You can't find an elementary teacher within 50 miles, but you might have one who lives in your county who would be able to come back in. And although I don't think that we will be able to meet this need as quick enough during the COVID pandemic, right now is a particular time as many of our educators are having to be going into quarantine and being out. Our retired educators are coming back in as they always have and served as substitutes and helping to fill that need. So that would be how that would work. Yes.
And an example of that, and I'm not trying to pick on Chuck Martin, but I can't resist. It's easier to find a kindergarten teacher for Alpharetta than it is, say, a STEM teacher in Bainbridge or somewhere like that.
I
We're in a more
that's a
rural
fair
area.
assessment. Yes.
Got it. Okay. What? Okay, I understand. Any other questions, committee? Buster, thank you very much for that. Thank you. You've already made your contact information available for the committee, have you not? Yeah.
Believe so by email.
Okay, very good. All right. ERS, is Jim here? Hey, Jim, how are you? I think you're on, sir.
All right, well, it's always a challenge for me to have to follow Buster in the speaking order, but I will do my best to keep up. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you all this afternoon. I'm Jim Potvin. I'm the Executive Director for the Employees Retirement System of Georgia. We're responsible for, of course, the flagship state employees retirement system, pension system. We have a number of other programs that we also administer as well that may be of interest to the committee. The public school employees retirement system is for employees in the school systems who are not teachers or certificated. So we're talking about the custodians and the bus drivers and the cafeteria workers, those folks. The legislative retirement system, near and dear to many of your hearts, I'm sure. The judicial retirement system for judges in the state of Georgia and district attorneys. And the Georgia Military Pension Fund, which is a small supplemental benefit for members of the Georgia Air and Army National Guards. We also are responsible for 3 statewide defined contribution programs. These are savings plans, essentially. So the state's 401k and 457 plans, what we collectively call Peach State Reserves. We handle those, and we handle something called the Georgia Defined Contribution Program, which is a savings plan for part-time and seasonal employees. We also have a couple of closed life insurance plans that has some legacy employees in there. About 28 or so thousand active members and a similar number of retirees that still have benefits outstanding in those programs, but nobody has been able to enter those plans since 2009. So it's a diverse portfolio. Total assets in the defined benefit or pension programs totals something about $19 billion or so right now. That's up from $16.7 billion on June 30th of 2020. Dr. Evans shared the investment experience of the teachers retirement system. Ours is broadly similar to that. We are both handled from the investment side by the state's Division of Investment Services. Our portfolio allocations are broadly similar, with the one exception that we have a small alternative investments portfolio that makes up less than 3% of our total portfolio at this point, primarily invested in private equity type programs. But beyond that, our investment experience, our results, the way that we handle our portfolios is broadly similar to the way TRS does as well. Buster talked about the funding ratio for TRS. That's obviously a key indicator for us as well. I was glad to hear the comments in the discussion when he was up here about how the funding ratio is best looked at as a sequence over a period of time. I can give you a number as of a given point in time, but that's just a snapshot. The important thing, I think, is the trend analysis. And certainly, an 80% funded ratio in one system is not the same as the 80% funded ratio in another system because the assumptions and the programs can be so vastly different. That is true for us and TRS as well. Our funded ratios are broadly similar. We're about 75.6% as of our most recent valuation. And we've been working hard over the past 10 years or so to make sure that our assumptions are placed in a way that we don't have liability surprises. We don't want to get to the end of the year and find out that the experience that we had was broadly different from what we assumed that it was going to be because our assumptions were too rosy. So we've been tightening up our assumptions to a great degree. We just completed an experience study that resulted in the most significant change was the change to the mortality tables that the plans use. As you can imagine, over time, longevity of employee lifespans is improving. We want to make sure that we're recognizing that in a timely fashion and don't get caught by these improvements not being prepared for them. So the ERS plan, as I said, is about 75.6% funded. The other systems are generally very well funded. Public school system, 84%. LRS and JRS are both over 100% funded. And the military fund, while it's only 57% funded, the reason for that is because it's a relatively newer program and we've been slowly building the asset base since its inception about 18 years ago. Contribution rates for the employee are very minor in the ERS. Employees contribute just 1.25% of their pay. On the employer side, they're more significant. We too have an unfunded liability, of course, that we're paying down, and that is the lion's share of our contribution rate. It has been steady for about 6 years at about 22 to 23% as a blended contribution rate over time. We do anticipate that those rates will hold at least through fiscal year 22, and then we'll see what the next couple of actuarial evaluations go from here. Since we're having such a good year this year, that does provide sort of a positive and optimistic view of future funding results as well. The ERS plan is composed really of 3 tiers that were dependent upon when somebody was hired. What we call the old plan was for people who were hired prior to 1982. There are almost nobody left in the system at this point, just a couple of dozen active members. So that one's basically gone from the active roles. Of course, we still have retirees that we're paying. What we called the new plan was for new hires between 1982 and the end of 2008. That was sort of your basic 2% times final average pay, a very similar formula to what the teachers' retirement system has today. Since 2009, new employees have been put into the current tier, which is a hybrid tier known as the Georgia State Employees Pension and Savings Plan. It's a mouthful, so we call that Gceps, not to be confused with the new plan. Gceps consists of a smaller pension benefit, a 1% pension benefit instead of the 2%. It also takes advantage of the 401k plan and adds an employer match feature so that essentially roughly half of your benefit is considered to be the defined contribution or 401k portion, and the other half is the pension portion. That has the effect of lowering the future liabilities that we're expecting to accrue in the pension system. So you were talking earlier about ways to decrease the unfunded liability, kind of close that gap. Well, for us, that's been in place really since the Gceps tier in 2009. And has been going on for about 11 years now. We pay out the pension plans about $1.5 billion per year, so roughly $125 million per month. The vast majority of that is to ERS retirees. We have about 54,000 ERS retirees at this point. Average benefit for ERS is around $2,200 per month. That number is coming down because newer retirees, the Gceps retirees, are just starting now, and newer retirees in the new plan tend to have smaller benefits than they used to in some of the earlier tiers. So our average has been decreasing during my tenure as the director here. For our benefit payments, our sources of funding, we are less reliant upon employee contributions. I mentioned that the contribution rate is quite a bit less, so we're down around 6% of our income is from employee contributions, around a third or so from employer contributions, and the remaining 60+% from investment returns. ERS population, we have about 56,000 active members. What's noteworthy about that is the number has been decreasing since 2008. In 2008, we had 75,000 active members in the system. Over the course of the next 7 years or so, that number fell to the low 60s, held there steady for a few years, and the past couple of years has decreased even further. I would say some of that is pandemic related, but not all of it. Not that there were any major job actions. I know we worked really hard last year to try to minimize the impact to the state workforce, but certainly hiring freezes and such have contributed so that attrition has reduced the population size. That does present short-term financial implications for the system. When we do an actuarial evaluation, we certainly have assumptions about the size of the employee payroll base, and we base our contribution rate percentages on those assumptions. And when we don't meet them because the employee base is actually shrinking, that puts upward pressure on a percentage-based formula. But in the long run, of course, then those are people that we're not going to have to pay either. So the long-term impact is probably pretty neutral overall to the system. On the Peach State Reserve side, our Gceps population is now well over half of the total active member population. It's about 60% actually, 35,000 active people in Gceps. We have a couple of key metrics that we look at for that population. We want to make sure that having a 401k and being dependent on that for a significant portion of your retirement benefit is a relatively new thing for the state's workforce. So we want to make sure that our workforce is kind of engaged in managing their retirement benefit while they're active employees in a way that they don't have to be if their whole benefit is a pension benefit. So we have features in place to try to encourage that. We auto-enroll people in the 401k plan. It's not mandatory that they stay in the plan, but certainly we would encourage that. And in fact, 92% of our population does stay in the 401k plan. We wanted to set the employee contribution rate as a default at a level that we felt would make it possible for them to build a substantial account balance. And we wanted it to be at a point where they would receive the full employer match, the 3% match. So we set the rate at 5%. That change was made in 2014. And we have seen a huge increase in the number of people who actually do receive the full employer match at this point. So we consider that to be a successful effort as well. Total assets in the 401k plan at this point are a little under $1.5 billion. In the 457 plan, it's about $700 million. So a little over $2 billion total assets in the Peach State Reserves program. I'll pause there and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for Jim? Okay. Representative Buckner.
Hey, Jim. I have to ask this question, and you know it's coming, I'm sure, but when you look at the difference between the payout for retirees for teachers being at $3,300 a month and for state employees being $2,200 a month and going down, I know part of it's because of the Gceps, and that's a smaller payment because it's a hybrid plan. Does COLA cost of living increases factor in that there's a difference between the two plans, that teachers do get cost of living increases and adjustments rather, and that the ERS doesn't always, is that affecting that monthly rate?
Certainly. For those of you who are new to the committee, I'll give a little bit of background. The enabling legislation in statute for ERS and TRS to pay COLAs is actually quite similar. And it gives the respective boards broad authority to make decisions on how they were going to pay and account for the liabilities associated with those payments. Way back, talking 50 years ago at this point, both boards made decisions that sort of set them on the path to where we are today. In the case of the teachers' retirement system, the board elected to pre-fund the COLAs, meaning that it was basically going to be built into the overall plan formula. And the assumption was that, those COLAs were going to be paid most years, if not just about every year, subject to certain, parameters or restrictions. On the ERS side, the board elected to treat COLAs as ad hoc payments, basically meaning that liabilities for COLAs would not be recognized until after the board granted them. So that was fine while the ERS plan was smaller than it is today. Until about 2008, I'd say both systems paid COLAs pretty much every year, more or less on an equal basis. But in the ERS's case, when the so-called Great Recession market impact hit us, the impact was quite profound. We pay a relatively large payroll based on our asset size, and it takes us longer to recover from financial market impacts than it does for a larger system like TRS. So the board at that time made a decision that they would not be able to continue paying COLAs every single year. And in fact, each year we have looked at the valuations and looked at updated financial information. And the board has not granted an actual COLA since that time. We have granted one-time payments in 3 or 4 out of the last 5 years, but those are non-compounding payments. So the actual check amounts, when I say what the average amount is, they have been unaffected by those one-time payments that we've made in the past 4 or 5 years.
And I think that's what we call in the appropriations process, the 13th check, if you will.
13th check.
Yeah. And
That's right.
I was just discussing earlier with some other folks that, that could be a lump sum, one check. It could be split over 2 times over the year or what have you.
And we've done that both ways, yes. Yeah. And obviously the impact of those is much less, and the board felt like, yes, we understand that the retirees need some assistance. They wanted to do it in a way that didn't stretch the system out too much.
Okay, we also have another question on Zoom. Mary Frances Williams from Marietta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions are about PSRS. So I know that there's a cap on the multiplier, and I'm not sure what that is right now. And I'm also curious where the multiplier is related to the cap.
So it's a slightly unusual provision. So the basic formula for the public school system is a dollar multiplier times years of service. Pay doesn't have anything to do with it. And so the legislature and the board work together to set what that multiplier is going to be. And it's subject to what the representative alluded to, a cap, which is currently $16.50 per month per year of service. And what that means is basically, as long as the General Assembly funds the any increase, we can go ahead and increase the benefit multiplier for active and retired public school members without having to go through a big, long legislative process. It's basically more of an appropriation than it is a legislative bill. So with that in mind, we made, I think it was 3 years in a row, we made 25-cent increases in the multiplier. So it currently sits at $15.50 per month per year of service.
And one more question, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. Yes.
Can you tell me what the average average monthly PSRS benefit is, or yearly?
It's a little over $300 per month, 310, 315, something like that, I believe.
All right, thank you. And okay.
Did you have something more, Mary Frances?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Anyone else have questions for ERS for Jim? Jim, in regard to the overall plan assets for ERS, outside the judicial, outside the military, outside the ERS, for the ERS, what were the plan assets total? It's about 15 billion, is that right?
15 and a half right now, I believe, yes.
And again, up with today's market, right? And the overall funded ratio, I think you had said 75.6.
75.6.
And same with Buster, just anything we can do in regard to legislative action to increase that number. I am very open to hearing about that.
I appreciate that.
Protecting those checks and those promises that were made. And you said 56,000 active. How many retirees or is retirees a portion of the 56,000?
No, 56,000 active. Those are people who are currently working and accruing benefits. The
Correct.
retired population is about 54,000.
Wow.
Yeah, it's almost 1-to-1.
Wow.
We are what you would call a very mature system. And I alluded to how, our payroll is relatively large compared to our asset base. That's the reason why.
Wow, I didn't realize that. And the same question that I had for Buster, I'll have for you. In regard to the vesting, let's say I start off as a state patrol officer or a GBI officer or something like that, and I start off working in Atlanta at X salary and so forth. Is it the same vesting schedule under TRS where it's 10 years cliff vesting, or is it a percentage to a particular year? Or how does that work?
For the pension system, it's 10-year cliff. For the 401k with the match, it's 20-year or 5-year graded 20% per year.
20% per year for 5 years. And under the pension, it's what?
10-year cliff.
10-year cliff. Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions for Jim or ERS? Well, I appreciate your time, Jim. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Folks, I believe we have some bills coming from members as well as from, I believe the administration is going to have some. We're going to have to dig quite a bit into a number of these issues, and obviously any fiscal bills as determined by Greg over there, they're definitely going to have a 2-year window to them. I would ask that we get bills in sooner rather than later. Simply because we don't know what our time frame is going to be like under COVID. When people have asked me when crossover day is, right now I don't know what day 20 is. So to any extent you have issues that you want to come forth to me or to the Vice Chairman Tom Kirby or to Sarah, what have you, please let's bring those issues sooner rather than later. So any questions from the members on the committee or on Zoom? Okay, well, I appreciate everyone's time today. We are adjourned.